Now to a story you'll only see here on News 4. New allegations of teacher sexual abuse inside one of D.C.'s most famous schools.
Two former students told the News 4 I-Team the same teacher abused them at Duke Ellington School of the Arts nearly a decade apart.
Jody Fleischer has been investigating for 3 months now and reveals questions about how complaints to the school, the district, even police were handled.
This teacher's name has not been made public until now, as these two young women share their stories for the first time. They each describe feeling alone and ashamed for years, while they say investigators failed to interview them, their friends, or even the adults who worked inside this prestigious school.
It ruins your whole life. It ruins it.
These two young women didn't know each other or even that the other existed.
There's like a certain level of shame that will keep silence going on for a very long time.
But in breaking that silence, they learned their accounts of sexual abuse by the same teacher are eerily similar.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Williams. I'm the chair.
For years, Mark Williams served as chair of the Literary Media and Communications Department at Duke Ellington School of the Arts, influential and revered. This young woman says she was drawn to him and his program before her junior year.
He thought I was this brilliant, talented writer. And, you know, I thought the world of him.
Shortly after enrolling, she says he told her she needed extra help to catch up to her peers.
He wanted me to come by myself to his classroom/office where he would be alone.
She says there were regular late-night phone calls.
By that time, he had asked me to write more and more personal, intimate details about my life.
Then she says Williams began sending her writings of his own, of a sexual nature.
Describing in very graphic detail himself and another woman, and he really wanted to know what I thought about that.
She says it quickly advanced from sexual writing to a sexual relationship, meeting the married father of two in his car after school, then a motel room. The principal from that time told the I-Team she received a complaint from a concerned parent and placed Williams on administrative leave, reporting him to the school district for investigation.
He asked me to delete every email he had ever sent me. He asked me to call him from payphones only. I couldn't live with myself if I would ruin his life, you know, the man I thought I was in love with.
The I-Team obtained this police report from November 2004, showing the school also asked D.C.'s Metropolitan Police Department to investigate an alleged sexual relationship, noting she was not of consensual age. The student remembers someone coming to her door one Saturday, but doesn't know if he was with the police or the district.
He asked me about the relationship and what had happened, and he said, I don't really care what you're doing. It's just against school policy.
Nothing about criminal law.
Oh, absolutely not.
She says there was no forensic interview. She denied everything, and the man left. But she says the agony of what her teacher did to her never did.
It never stops. It gives you nightmares for the rest of your life.
She says he was back in class her final semester, and their relationship continued into college. In 2008, once she ended it, she says he sent this email calling her beloved, saying, I love you so very much, even apologizing for her being a secret. She never thought about coming forward until she realized there could be others.
He invited me to take a playwriting class with him.
This young woman says nearly 10 years later, Mark Williams approached her at school when she was 15 and recruited her to switch from acting to writing.
Because I was a latecomer to the department, I was told that I had a lot of catching up to do, and the way to catch up was to have one-on-one private sessions with him.
She says behind the locked door of a classroom, he asked her to write about intimate details of her life, then shared his own sexual writing, preying on her vulnerability. She says their meetings moved to his car, then a motel room.
There was a point where I at the very beginning, when I had tried to stop it, because I had the sense that, like, no, you're a father figure to me.
She says it continued for about 2 years. She told no one until 2018, when she confided in her ex-boyfriend from high school. He tells the I-Team he then sent this email to more than 100 school leaders, teachers, and former students. The subject line, Mark Williams is a rapist and a predator.
I was not at a point where I felt like I could do it for myself. And so while I really did not appreciate how it was done at the time, I think ultimately it was the right thing to do.
The school placed Williams on administrative leave again and again reported him to the school district and police. Though her friend didn't disclose her name, she felt certain she'd hear from investigators because of the details he shared.
I thought that inevitably someone would figure it out.
So did Kirsten Johnson, a former student who once revered Williams as a mentor until she saw that 2018 email shared on social media.
But I remember reading it and knowing in my gut that it was true.
She said she never witnessed abuse as a student and lacked the training to even look for it when she returned to the school as a teacher in Williams' department. But thinking back, she quickly suspected who it was.
I'm like, look at the relationships. Look at the relationships that look like your relationship. Find the one that was off. And I found it quickly. And it broke my heart.
Now a successful playwright in New York, she says despite having taught in the writing department when the alleged abuse happened, no one ever questioned her. This 2018 police report listed only an unknown female. A police spokesperson told the I-Team, at this time, we have explored all available leads.
I feel like they didn't try very hard. Does that mean it ends because you can't? There's still a victim to be found.
The I-Team found her after just a few hours of research and with one phone call.
There's something empowering about knowing that he has to face the truth of it.
A Duke Ellington spokesperson told the I-Team school leaders never identified who she was because MPD said not to question students or teachers. Williams resigned in January 2019 while under investigation. He did not return the I-Team's repeated calls or emails seeking comment about the two cases nearly a decade apart. He has never been charged.
Had they really investigated, there was evidence of the relationship, right? You guys were emailing,
Tons.
you were calling.
Piles and piles and piles, yes.
She's now suing the school and the district, saying they violated Title IX, a federal education law which requires a full investigation and protections for victims. DCPS told the I-Team it has no records of any investigations of Mark Williams, not from 2004 or 2018. It's unclear whether anyone even remembered the older case when the new one surfaced.
I really trusted the people who worked there a lot. And it upsets me that nothing about this was really taken seriously.
I don't think he should be in a classroom. I don't think he should be near young people.
This former student is talking about her Duke Ellington School of the Arts writing teacher, Mark Williams. For years, she kept silent about an alleged sexual relationship with her high school teacher until the News 4 I-Team tracked her down while investigating this young woman's very similar story.
All of that hurt and just absorbing all of it really made it impossible to live a fulfilling life, live a normal life.
The I-Team confirmed the school placed Mark Williams on administrative leave during both investigations in 2004 and 2018. But what's unclear is who did the investigating and what those investigations found.
Predators don't strike once, they don't strike twice, they strike many times. And so it just makes me go like, how many students were missed?
Kirsten Johnson is a Duke Ellington graduate who once revered Williams as a mentor. She returned to teach in his department in 2013, but she says no one ever talked to her about how to spot or report abuse.
I needed training, no question. And I needed to know what the protocol was for being a mandatory reporter.
A teacher is a mandatory reporter under Title IX, a federal civil rights law to protect students from sexual discrimination, abuse, or harassment. It's supposed to offer protections for potential victims. For example, not returning them to a class where they'd be in contact with an alleged abuser, or in this case, students who adored Williams and blamed her for his absence.
He was on administrative leave and then he wasn't, and I was back in his classes. I had even tried to get out of the department entirely.
The school's principal from back then canceled a scheduled on-camera interview, but told the I-Team she reported Williams to DC Public Schools for investigation in 2004. In this 2020 Facebook message to the former student, she wrote, "The investigation resulted in an inconclusive decision," and that she was not happy that he was allowed to return. She told the I-Team that's why she removed him from leading a senior production and as department head anyway.
It made me question sort of why he had been able to come back. If you knew, why didn't you do something?
In 2018, when this young woman's case came to light, the school district also investigated. The I-Team obtained emails from her friend documenting contact with a DCPS investigator, but she says no one ever reached out to speak with her.
There is a responsibility that you have to students. It just doesn't seem like people care.
A spokesperson for the school says Williams resigned in January of 2019 while under investigation. Despite 18 years teaching in D.C., the I-Team found he never held a teaching license. That's not required of Duke Ellington's arts teachers.
The teachers there are held to a different standard from other DCPS teachers.
That's because while Duke Ellington School of the Arts is a public school, it is not governed by DCPS. Instead, it's managed by its own nonprofit board, of which Mark Williams was a member. In a statement to the I-Team, the district reiterated Mark Williams was not a DCPS employee.
I just always had the feeling that the people in those buildings were only after keeping their jobs at all costs and keeping up the reputation of Ellington.
The school's current principal confirms any Title IX investigations are conducted by DCPS, but in response to a Freedom of Information request, the school district told the I-Team it has no records of any investigations of Mark Williams. When the 2004 student asked the school for records of her investigation, the enrollment office emailed saying, unfortunately, personnel files, HR records were not properly recorded or maintained prior to 2017.
I question how seriously they take them if they don't have the proper record keeping. And then, of course, if they haven't done a thorough investigation.
Shiwali Patel runs the Justice for Student Survivors program for the National Women's Law Center. She says teenage victims are often reluctant to participate in investigations.
They may not want to be interviewed. The school should still think about what are other ways to find evidence?
Emails from former students show Williams frequently used a personal email address and cell phone to communicate regarding schoolwork. It's unclear whether investigators ever checked the contents of those messages. A spokesperson for the school told the I-Team they never identified the second young woman because police told them not to question students or teachers.
Even if he's not technically an employee of the district, they still have an obligation to ensure that he is not abusing other students.
Records show the school did report Williams to police in 2004 and 2018. He has never been charged.
The Title IX requirements on schools and school districts to investigate are very separate from what the criminal system requires.
This young woman was already in college when her case was reported, but she wonders, had the earlier case been handled differently, would hers even exist?
What, it looks bad on the school? I mean, like, you look pretty bad now. It's only the school's fault when the school does nothing.
Mark Williams did not respond to the I-Team's repeated calls and emails requesting comment. Records show he sold his home in Northern Virginia in 2020 and his wife took a job overseas. This young woman is now pursuing a Title IX lawsuit, saying Williams, the school, its leaders, and the district all failed to protect her.
Kids come there wanting to be seen and understood and appreciated for their talent and their art, and I think that makes it a playground for predators. So that needs to be fixed.
The current principal started in 2017. She declined our request for an interview, but said the school hired its own Title IX coordinator this year to supplement and accelerate the district's response. D.C. Council member Brooke Pinto sent this letter to the state superintendent of education and the head of D.C. public schools, calling what our News 4 I-Team investigation uncovered about these sex abuse allegations extraordinarily troubling. She said attention must be paid to the systemic lapses and changes must be made to ensure investigations of this nature are handled properly and documented with detailed records.
To allow our students to be exposed to this type of behavior and then not have a thorough investigation and follow-up and accountability was so troubling and disturbing. and knew that there was more that needed to be done.
D.C. Councilmember Brooke Pinto represents Ward 2, which is home to Duke Ellington School of the Arts. She says watching these two young women allege they were groomed by their writing teacher, Mark Williams, for a sexual relationship 9 years apart was hard enough. But the questions about how the school's unique relationship with the school district may have helped him avoid scrutiny made a bad situation even worse.
I want to honor that independence because it is such a unique place, but there have to be protective mechanisms in place so that when something like this happens, there is an objective third party who can participate in the oversight, in the investigation, and in ensuring that our kids are kept safe.
In this letter, she calls for a formal review of the Duke Ellington School board structure and the addition of an objective person who is a trained Title IX expert. The school is currently governed by its own board and not DCPS, despite being a public school.
There were systems breakdowns at every level, which is part of the reason one of the requests we've made is to maintain a centralized system through DCPS of all personnel files and make sure that there's updated record keeping for these types of allegations and complaints.
A school spokesperson told the I-Team both cases were reported to DCPS for investigation, but DCPS told the I-Team it has no records of ever investigating the allegations. Because Williams was an employee of the school and not the school district, DCPS had no personnel file for him. The school also acknowledged record-keeping failures prior to launching a new system in 2017.
It's unacceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable, which is why we addressed this letter to OSSI, because this requires leadership and oversight above DCPS to make sure that record keeping is maintained.
OSSI told the I-Team it has no records on Williams because Duke Ellington's teachers are not required to be licensed. Williams taught there for 18 years before resigning in 2019 while under investigation. He did not return the I-Team's repeated calls and emails seeking comment.
We hope that OSSI responds seriously and diligently, and we'll continue the discussion. Not our problem is not acceptable.
Pinto also forwarded the letter to D.C.'s mayor, police chief, and the new commander of the Youth and Family Services Division, which is now re-examining both cases, since both women told the I-Team they were never formally interviewed at the time by school district investigators or police. Williams was never charged.
We will be following that investigation closely, using both our oversight responsibilities on the Judiciary Committee and working with MPD to see if they are following through on what they say they will.
A spokesperson told me the school is open to a dialogue on all of these recommendations, including sharing its personnel files with DCPS and making sure Title IX expertise is represented on its governing board.
The struggle is, for me, what more could I have done?
You can't help but beat yourself up that you missed something.
These two teachers taught at Duke Ellington School of the Arts at different times, but both watched intently as these two young women shared accusations of abuse by their writing teacher when they were students in 2004 and 2013.
I felt immediately both horrified and saddened.
Kenneth Carroll taught this young woman in the literary media department in 2004. He says students and teachers knew why Mark Williams had been on administrative leave that fall. And when he returned in the spring of 2005, Carroll was incensed.
I was amazed. I talked to my colleagues and said, how is this possible?
He said he went to the school's principal at the time and told her his students had seen evidence, explicit emails between the student and Mark Williams. The former principal told the I-Team she doesn't recall that, but if so, she'd have shared that with the school district's investigators. She said it was their decision to let Williams return. In a message to the young woman years later, she wrote, "The investigation resulted in an inconclusive decision."
It would have been very simple to pull that email and to find the evidence.
Carroll says he also approached Williams directly to ask about the alleged sexual relationship with that student.
He never said I didn't do it. He never objected to what I was saying. And he never said this was all a misunderstanding. He said he agreed with me that he owed the students an apology.
Which Carroll says Williams did. Then, weeks later, in a conversation with the new department head, Carroll says he was asked to resign.
There was the decision made that I needed to go because I wouldn't keep quiet. I was going to be a problem as long as he was there.
Carroll says he left that semester and didn't even realize Williams was still teaching in 2018 when he was placed on administrative leave a second time.
There were always rumors and whispers from students and staff about his behavior in general.
Michelle Baskin taught chemistry at Duke Ellington for 11 years and was still there when Williams resigned in the spring of 2019 while under investigation. She'd seen this email calling him a rapist and a predator sent by a former student whose ex-girlfriend from high school had confided in him.
By the end of the email, I knew who it was. My heart sank and I was angry.
She says she'd heard rumors about Williams and the 2004 student for years. It had been described as consensual, even though a student cannot legally consent to sex with their teacher.
There were administrators in 2004 who were still administrators in 2018.
The school reported the later allegation to police and the school district for investigation, but the I-Team obtained this police report listing the young woman as an unknown female. She told us no one ever contacted her to ask about Williams.
It's heartbreaking that nobody talked to her, and it's heartbreaking that that opportunity wasn't taken to find other victims if they did exist.
A school spokesperson told the I-Team police had directed administrators not to question students or teachers, but Baskin says they didn't have to.
I told the principal I know who this student is.
She says for months she asked current principal Sandy Logan how the investigation was going and has no doubt she used that former student's name.
What I don't know is, was her name passed on to MPD and they just waited to have her come to them? Or was the name never passed on?
A school spokesperson tells the I-Team Logan does recall sharing that student's name with police. Williams has never been charged and did not respond to the I-Team's repeated calls and emails. The school district told the I-Team he was a Duke Ellington employee, not a DCPS employee, which may explain why the district has no record of ever investigating him.
I yelled at the computer screen when I saw that. I did not know how that could possibly be the case.
Both teachers say change is long overdue at Duke Ellington. A DC councilwoman has now called for better record keeping for abuse allegations and oversight for teachers, no matter who hired them.
I just don't think we did a good enough job to protect these young people. And we owe them an apology, all the adults who let Mark return to that building.
His former principal and that acting department head both told me they don't remember the details surrounding his departure. And the school has said its personnel records were poorly maintained prior to 2017, but that has improved in recent years.
That reporting has prompted 2 more former students to come forward about their encounters with another teacher.
Investigative reporter Jody Fleischer is here now with where that case stands right now and why they've decided to speak publicly for the very first time.
This arts teacher was arrested for child sex abuse last year. He entered a plea of not guilty, but because of COVID delays, his case is still awaiting consideration by a grand jury. Police arrested him on one charge, though their records indicate witnesses told them he had sex with 3 teens who had all been his students.
I really thought that I was romantically involved with him and how I thought I was in love with him and how I thought this was a real relationship. So it just showed that I wasn't alone in that.
For years, this young woman didn't want to talk to anyone about what her former teacher, Mark Walker, is now accused of doing while she was his student. She never reported it until a detective called her in 2020 when another former student came forward.
I was like, okay, something is actually going to happen and I can be free. So on that conversation on the phone with the detective that day, I completely broke down.
She says she was just 15 years old when the relationship began in 2015 and it continued for more than a year. She was in his photography class at Duke Ellington School of the Arts, acclaimed for developing elite artists. But she says the mentoring relationships in the arts program also created vulnerability.
He started to ask us personal questions and making sure that we could trust him. I confided in him about the death of my father.
She says despite Walker being her teacher and a working artist who painted murals around the district, she and other students thought of him as a friend, with calls and texts at all hours.
When we came back from the summer after sophomore year, he kind of gave me this letter explaining like his affections towards me, letting me know that how beautiful I was and why I was special.
She says it escalated to a romantic and physical relationship, but eventually went beyond what she was comfortable with.
I did say I told you no, and I told you why I didn't want to, and you still took it upon yourself to do it. I was in like full tears, traumatized, horrified at this moment. And he tried to console me.
She told a few friends, but avoided the details.
Everyone loved him, so I didn't want to feel isolated, like if I did say anything.
But someone did, a mom of a classmate who'd heard about the alleged relationship. She didn't want to be identified, but told the I-Team she mentioned it to a school administrator in 2016.
So at that time, the whole senior class knew.
A DC police spokesperson said there's no record of a report on Walker prior to 2020. DC Public Schools has not responded to an I-Team request for records, but in a court filing said it was not responsible, in part because Walker and most of the school's staff are not employees of the district. A school spokesperson acknowledged employee files were not properly maintained at that time, but says no one recalls that report from the mom. This young woman says Walker warned her about it when it happened.
He told me, I'm going to have to be investigated by administration, and they're probably going to ask you questions.
So what happened when the school administrators came to talk to you?
They never did. They never came to talk to me. I just kind of pushed it to the back of my mind. And tried to finish my senior year.
In 2018, she'd already graduated when she says he sent her this text as a heads up in case she was questioned, and that he was again sorry. He said administration was going to investigate old rumors that he was sleeping with students after current students reported it. In early 2019, she says he texted saying the investigation was over and he'd been cleared.
It just feels like there was ample evidence to find, and both times, like nothing came out of it.
This former student was in the same class and told the I-Team Walker told her about the alleged relationship and both investigations. She considered him a close friend.
That's weird and not normal to be like having a relationship with your high school teacher. But for some reason, based on how he presented himself to us, all of us heard that and still didn't say anything.
That all changed in 2020.
I'm the one that ended up saying something years later after it happened to me.
She says shortly after graduation in 2017, before she left for college, Walker turned their friendship physical.
When things like escalated, he was like, "You're 17, we can't do this." And then did it anyway.
She says her 2020 report to DCPS was forwarded to police, but she was heartbroken and furious when a detective told her her sexual encounter wasn't against the law because she was no longer Walker's student and she'd turned 17.
That 6 months didn't stop it from harming me. Like, it didn't stop it from like changing how I saw myself and how I trusted people. It didn't stop any of the trauma around it, but it does impede on any legal action being able to be taken, and that makes me feel sick.
She also pointed police toward the other two teens, one who declined to talk with the detective and the I-Team, the other who is so glad someone finally spoke up.
I'm thankful, honestly, especially like that she said my name and thought about me.
She says watching other former students share their stories with News 4 earlier this year empowered her to speak now and reinforced that she wasn't to blame.
It just highlighted the fact that no, you couldn't have participated in this. Like, you were a child. It definitely just unveiled how much grooming was done for all of us.
Police arrested Mark Walker last year for first-degree child sex abuse. This young woman has also filed a civil case against the school and Walker, in which he invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination 185 times. He did not return the I-Team's calls or emails seeking comment.
I just want justice, honestly. And for me, and then all of the other women as well, regardless of the teacher.